Where have I been the last few days? Watching The Walking Dead. Why? My ADHD takes me to strange locations. I hyperfixate on shit at the completely wrong time. But it's actually something that I wanted to talk about in regards to The Walking Dead, because like the producers of The Walking Dead, they were doing a couple interviews and they were talking about how they didn't understand, like, you know, why they had lost the audience, because they kind of felt as though the audience and the comic book readers knew that Glenn was going to die, and the decision to stick with that from the comic book led to like a major loss of viewership. I think they lost like 25% of their viewership after Glenn died, where people just never came back to the show. And it continued to go down until the last season. Now, there were some highlights in the last few seasons. Daryl's always a friggin' gigantic highlight. Michonne's arc. Rick kept on being a boss until he wasn't the boss and he was gone. Jeffrey Dean Morgan is Negan. Absolutely fantastic. But none of these were powerful or charismatic enough to recapture the fire that the first few seasons of The Walking Dead basically had. And one of the things that I point to, or should I say the first nail in the coffin? Yeah, definitely the first nail in the coffin. We'll talk about the second nail in the coffin in a separate video. But the first nail in the coffin is definitely Glenn's death. Glenn was very loved. And even as somebody who read the comics and knew that Glenn was supposed to die, the decision to kill Glenn still felt wrong for the TV show universe, because it's one of those things where the character itself was too big to fail. And I literally mean too big to fail, because when you look at Daryl's character, Daryl does not exist within the scope of the comics. When you look at Andrea's character, she dies off in like the first few seasons, but it takes until the latter parts of the final arc of the comics for her character to meet a fate where she basically can't escape from the walkers and she gets bit and she ends up dying. But for Glenn, we were with Glenn from the beginning. Like, Glenn was the likable guy. Glenn is the guy that you were rooting for throughout the entire show. He's a dork. He's a nerd. He's a fucking police pizza delivery guy. He's the normal guy. He's one of us who has no background with guns, no background being a badass, no background running into danger or anything along those lines. He was just quick on his feet and super awkward. And as the seasons progressed, you know, at the end of season 1, we roll into season 2, we saw him develop a fling, which turned into a relationship with Maggie. And then we saw that relationship grow. We saw Glenn take more of a leadership role as a lot of the people he looked up to basically started dying as the show continued. Then we got towards the end of the prison arc, and Glenn's basically Rick's number 2. Yes, Daryl's there, but when it comes to making like decisions, Rick always made sure that Glenn was in his ear so he can understand like what direction to go in. Is this decision that I'm about to make a logical decision? So for him to basically die at that point, well, not even the point in which he died, it's the fake out or the 2 fake outs. So the first fake out happens when he's trapped in the rotating doors. It's him, Everybody Hates Chris, and Douchebag McGee. Douchebag McGee runs, and we think that it's going to be both Glenn and Everybody Hates Chris who end up being killed by the walkers. We only lose Chris. Sucks. But then we have the second fake out. Second fake out being when he's on top of the trash can, he falls off. Douchebag McGee's the one who gets torn to shreds. Glenn's able to crawl underneath the trash can and get away. Okay. You made us think for like, I think after that, the show went on like hiatus for like 2 weeks as though they're trying to build up drama. But okay. But then as the season progressed, comic book readers saw things that were different. The person who ended up dying to the crossbolt wasn't Abraham. Abraham was still alive during that scene where Negan has everybody. Then Abraham takes the hit for Glenn and he's dead. So we're like, okay, that's one person dead. And then they spin around and they kill Glenn as well. When Glenn died, it killed the connection that a lot of us had. a lot of us had a connection with the character, and our connection with the character is what caused us to show up every single Sunday to watch how that character was going to survive within his environment. Once that character died, the link that a lot of people had to the show was suddenly broken, because a lot of people didn't identify with Rick, never identified with Shane. They didn't identify with Carl. Not until like the later seasons they started identifying with Carl. A lot of people didn't identify with Michonne. Glenn was our guy. He was our guy. He was our way in, our way to put ourselves inside the show for how we would essentially basically operate inside The Walking Dead, inside of a community where we would start picking up skills and go from like the timid person to like the useful badass person. Killing off Glenn was a horrible idea, because now that Glenn, like think about it. Once Glenn dies, think about all of the scenarios he could have been in that would have made the show better. The siege on Alexandria, the siege on the hilltop, the battle inside of the kingdom, like all of these things which would have had Glenn's insight and Glenn basically running around doing shit were no longer available. So we had to end up falling back on characters like Daryl, like Michonne. And it's not a hit against Daryl or Michonne. They're extremely popular characters, but popular and likable are two completely different things. You can think Daryl is a badass, but you're not gonna like Daryl as much, because basically he just grunts. He's Wolverine. He grunts, he comes in, he kills who needs to be killed, he gets the hell up out of there, and he says like 4 words. Same thing with Michonne. She can deliver some really, really powerful lines, but for the most part, you're there to see Michonne chop people up with a samurai sword. Glenn was the guy. He was the North Star, the waypoint that we used to basically disseminate all the information inside this universe. Once that was gone, we no longer had like that likable, relatable link. And without the likable, relatable link, a lot of people really didn't feel like coming back. Like a lot of people, me included, were super pissed off. I left and I didn't pick back up The Walking Dead until they were in the Whisperer War, which means I completely missed out on the initial Negan showing up and dealing with Negan, and then finally beating Negan and leading into the war between Hilltop, Kingdom, and Alexandria. Wasn't there for any of that. Didn't give a shit. By the time I came back, like, Carl was dead, the Whisperer War was happening, Negan was a prisoner, and I had to go back and see all of this other shit. And the second thing, we're gonna do a separate video because, like, for whatever reason, YouTube doesn't like when I do long videos. So the second thing is definitely going to be about Carl, where I think killing Carl was a horrible idea, and the way in which the producers went about it was extremely horrible. Let me know what you think, because like I said, my hyperfixation decided to fixate on The Walking Dead for whatever reason, and ended up watching like the first 3 seasons again. And then as I was getting closer and closer to Glenn dying, I was like, I think that's what I'm gonna call it. But comment down below, do you agree, do you disagree, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.